Hi, my name is Natalia. Over the next few minutes, I will try to share with you some tips, some advice that I feel can be helpful for your writing task in the EvAU exam. I've tried to come up with what I consider the most important tips when you prepare your writing task and when you're actually doing it on the day of the exam. I have to warn you, I'm not going to tell you anything that your teachers haven't already told you. So this is going to sound familiar because I'm just going to be repeating or maybe summarizing what you already know and what your teachers have very rightly been telling you from the start of a year. So you can find them here. I'll be explaining them in a minute. Before I start detailing the tips, however, you need to remember the criteria, the success criteria that you have to meet. This is the way that the teacher correcting your exam is going to give you marks or is going to say that your writing is not very good. So this is the rubric and you need to know it. You're going to get 1 point. Remember, you have 3 points. So 1 point will be given to what they call task fulfillment. That is, are you actually answering the question? Are you using the right number of words? In that criterion, you also get your organization, whether your text is cohesive and coherent. Does it make any sense? Are you explaining ideas correctly? And are they connected in a proper way, in an organized way? And basically, whether the text reads easily. If your text is easy to read and can be understood by somebody other than yourself. You will get another point depending on your accuracy, on how correct your English is. So it has to do with your grammar and your vocabulary being correct, accurate, and not making mistakes. Especially not making terrible mistakes, or what I call scary mistakes, and also not making mistakes that make the text impossible to understand. Finally, you will also get 1 point, up to 1 point, depending on the range of language you use. And this is what I call, and I will be explaining it a bit later, the wow effect. Wow, oh my God, that is very good. I will explain that later. So, based on that rubric and the way you're going to get marks, these could be my tips. So, I'm going to start with the first tip. Fulfill the task as instructed. And it has to do with the number of words and actually answering the specific question. Okay, so a frequently asked question. You have to write between 80 and 120 words. What happens if I write fewer words? Okay, if you write, for example, 78 words, it could be okay. Believe me, teachers are not going to be counting word by word. So missing 2 words, 1 word, 3 words, nothing's going to happen. However, if you write 60 words, that is a problem. The problem is not only that you haven't fulfilled the task, you're not doing what they told you to do. The problem is that your text is going to be too short, so probably your ideas will not be complete. Probably you won't have a proper introduction, development and conclusion. Your 60 words is nothing. 80 words is very short indeed. So, okay, if you write 77, 78, 79, that's fine. If you're writing very few words, then that is a problem. The other way round. What happens if I write more than 120 words? And I know especially very good students have this problem that they might be used to writing 300 words without any trouble at all. Okay, so that might be a problem. Again, if you write 125 words, maybe 130, it might be okay. Don't worry, don't panic. It's okay. Again, we're not going to be counting word by word. But if you write, for example, 250, 300, you know what I mean, an exaggerated amount, again, that is not what you're asked to do. You're asked to write 120 maximum. Okay, so please stick to the word limit. Okay, that is very important. So if you could write more, I'm sorry, but then you have to summarize. Just stick to the 2-3 ideas you would like to discuss. That's it. You won't have any more words available. And then, frequently asked problem, stick to the question. Answer the question you have been asked. Let me give you an example. Imagine this is a possible writing task you might be given in your exam. Discuss the effect that the lockdown is the situation we've had that because of the coronavirus, we've had to live inside our houses. We couldn't go outside. So we were locked down in our houses. Okay, in Spanish it would be something like confinamiento. Okay? So discuss the effect that the lockdown has had on the environment and whether and if it will have long-lasting consequences. Okay, some of my students, because they see something about the environment, they say, oh, good. And they have memorized just a general, just a very ordinary writing task, something about the environment. So, yeah, when they ask me something about the environment, I will talk about climate change and pollution, and that's it. So, whatever they ask me, I will talk about that. And they just vomit what they memorized. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. You have to read the question carefully and actually answer that question, that precise, specific question. Okay? So in this case, because it's asking about the lockdown, okay, so during these 2 months of lockdown, what has happened? Number one, the air in cities is much cleaner because people were not driving their cars. People were not using public transport. So because there were no cars in streets in cities, the air was much cleaner. It was not polluted. So pollution decreased. Because, for example, there were not any tourists at all in places such as Venice, the waters were very clean, and you could see the buildings, you know, and everything was much cleaner. Any other possible consequences? That because people now have to use masks and some people are using gloves as well, unfortunately, they are throwing away, they are disposing of these masks and gloves incorrectly, and they are throwing them, dumping them in the streets, which is wrong, and it will have a negative consequence. Do you see what I mean? So I'm talking specifically about this question, not just about general ideas about climate change and pollution. Right. Tip number 2. Again, very popular with teachers. Every English teacher will have told you this. You have to write a draft. You have to write on a rough piece of paper before you have to think of the ideas you're going to use and the language you're going to use. Okay, if you're still not convinced, let me try and persuade you, let me try and convince you. And please, please write a draft. It is very useful. Number 1, because it is essential for you to think of the structure, how you're going to organize your ideas, whatever ideas you might have. So, on a draft, you can think of your introduction, you can have of your development, and you can think of your conclusion. Okay, this is the general topic. This is just a possible way for you to organize it. Okay, so you know you have this. So in your introduction, you can think of two things. You can think of the ideas you're going to mention, but also of the language you're going to use. Because perhaps you might have a great idea, a brilliant idea, but are you sure you want to express that in English? And are you sure you know how to express that in a way that everybody reading that will understand what you mean? So if you write a draft and you know how to say that in English and you take the time to think about it, that's fine. If you start writing automatically without thinking, you might start writing your sentence and you say, I don't know how to finish. So that's why this is not a good idea. Automatic writing is not a good idea. So if you write your draft, you know, or you have the time to think if you're writing or how to write correct, clear sentences. And also in your draft, you can think of good sentences or expressions. For example, if you remember a piece of vocabulary that you learned in class, or an idiom, something interesting, you say, oh, I can use this here, and they will be impressed by my English. So that way you know that you have some words related to the topic that you want to use, and then you will remember to write them and where to use them correctly. So definitely writing a draft makes a very big difference. And don't worry about time, because in general students tend to have enough time to read the text, do the grammar exercises, and then write your writing task. Usually there's enough time. Tip number 3. Use the conventions of a text type. What do I mean by this? In general, and probably, you're going to be asked to write an essay. You have different types of essays, okay? And you have some examples here taken from past exams in the past few years. In this case, you have to take a stand. You have to choose an option and defend your position. Okay? Some other essays as well are what it's called discursive essays. The idea is you're asked to talk about the advantages and disadvantages, for example, or explore and discuss the consequences of gender inequality. So in that way, in these kinds of essays, you have to show the two sides of the argument. Okay? Other essays might include or might ask you to talk about the problems and solutions. You have to discuss those problems and the possible solutions you can find. In all the examples I've mentioned, these are essays, which means it's a type of text which is formal and academic. What does it mean? That the tone you have to use is serious, okay? And you have to use formal language, academic language. So for example, you can't use any contractions. Instead of saying I'm, you have to say I am. Instead of they've got, they've seen, they have got. All of that. And as I say, the general tone has to be serious and formal. Another possibility, you may be asked to give more personal views, more personal opinions about topics, and you have some examples here. However, even if they're asking about your own personal opinion or memory or something like that, even if you talk about feelings, Still, it has to be a formal text, okay? The tone has to be serious, formal, and academic, even if you're asked about your personal views. Perhaps you might be asked, it's not very frequent, but you might be asked to write an email to a friend. If that happened, okay, you would have to start saying, dear Mary, dear Peter, whatever. You could use some informal language. You could use contractions because you're writing to a friend. Okay, so some informality might be okay, but I'm saying some, because at the end of the day, this is an exam where you have to show your level of English, and somehow you have to show that you are a mature person as well. So even if it was an email to a friend, you should use some language which shows your level, okay? But as I say, probably 90% probability, the question you're going to be asked is going to be similar to the examples I showed you before, more essay types. Tip number 4, and it has to do with writing a draft. When you're writing that draft, plan your structure in terms of paragraphs, the ideas you're going to say, and the linking words you're going to use. So, as you very well know, as you've heard plenty of times from your teachers, your writing needs to have a very clear visual structure. I mean, even without reading it, you can clearly see that you have 3 or maybe 4 paragraphs. Probably in this kind of text, you will only have enough words to fill 3 paragraphs. But I mean, 3 or 4 could be okay. So the first paragraph will be your introduction. The last paragraph will be your conclusion, and you need to have both an introduction and a conclusion. You can't just start writing about the topic without any introduction, and you can't finish without a conclusion. That is essential. And then in the middle, you have what we call the body paragraph or body paragraphs, where you develop your ideas, your reasons, your pros and cons. Okay? In your introduction, you need to have what we call a thesis statement. That is, one sentence that summarizes what the essay is about. So, for example, if you're going in the example I gave you before, the effects of the lockdown, so you could say something like, you might have said something before, but then to finish your introduction, you say something like, in this essay, I will discuss the main consequences of the lockdown, for example. You have to please pay attention to the fact that I am not copying the exact same words I had in the question. I'm maybe saying the same, but with different words, with my words. Okay? I will give you a link later with some of the expressions you can use in your introductions, body, or conclusion. Then, as I said, in the body of the writing task, you have to give your supporting ideas, the reasons why you say something, or the advantages and disadvantages, for example. And then you have conclusion. And the arrows I have in here are the linking words, the connectors. If you're going to say something which is similar, then you need you need to have a word that somehow adds the information. Words such as besides, moreover, there are many of them. I'll give you a link to that. If you're going to say something which is the opposite, then you need to use a contrast word, such as however, and you need to have those linking words to join one paragraph to the next paragraph, and also to join your sentences, even within the same paragraph, or even, in the middle of a sentence. But your ideas need to be related. Otherwise, it would be as if you simply were making the shopping list, just bullet points, and that's it. A writing task is not your shopping list. Okay? Using linking words and what we call signposting, making it easy for people reading our text to know what we're saying and where we're going, as if we were giving directions in the street. This is essential when writing. And you have lots of ideas and resources here. You have a chart with linking words that you can use. I'm sure you have many from your teachers, but it's just more ideas. So go for the one that says B1. Then, if you have a time, read this about signpost language as well. It might help you. And then, in this link here, you have some ideas, some possible expressions that you can use when you're writing an essay, as you will probably have to do. So again, you have the links here, but if you go to the main link I told you at the very beginning, you will find everything. Tip number 5 is what I call the wow effect. Let me tell you what it is. Okay, the wow effect, or the oh my god effect. I'm using it here in a very positive way. And what I mean is, when teachers are reading your exams, probably you think of teachers as people having a red pen and using your red pen a lot and saying, oh, this is wrong, this is terrible, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let me tell you a secret. Teachers also have a green pen. And with a green pen, we underline or we circle all the nice things or the positive things we see in our students' work. Okay, so what makes teachers really happy is not to have to use a red pen, or not use the red pen, maybe not very much. You might have a writing task that doesn't have many mistakes, but maybe it is not good enough for the level. But an English teacher will be really happy if they can use their green pen a lot by using very nice language and something that makes us say, oh, this is very good English. This student is using this expression, this passive voice, this conditional, this is being used very nicely here. You could say this sentence and this could be correct. You could say, people say that Stranger Things, the Netflix show. People say that Stranger Things is a good show. That is a perfectly correct sentence. I can't complain about it. Good. If I were you, probably, and if I wanted to impress my teacher, instead of say, I might say claim. People claim that Stranger Things is a good show. Okay, and that would sound better. But what would sound even better is this. Stranger Things is claimed to be a good show. Does it ring a bell? It's a passive sentence. And I'm not using it just because I want to make my teacher happy. I'm using it because it sounds much more natural in English. Okay? So this would be a much better option. Even if the first sentence was correct, and I can't complain. But this is much better. I'm saying that you should impress the examiner and take somehow some risks. I'm saying take calculated risks. Don't start writing things if you're not sure that they are okay, that they are correct. Okay? But if you know that you can make a passive and it sounds okay, do it. Or use nice vocabulary. And that way you will impress your reader, your examiner. if you think your level of English is okay and you're confident with it. So if you click here, you can find some ideas of how to be more precise and more accurate when using your language. Tip number 6, read your text again before you hand it in, before you give it to the teachers in the room. And proofread it. Check that there are no mistakes. I know that many students, I don't know if it is your case, but many students, by the time they finish their English exam, they are very tired and they don't want to read it anymore. They just want to give it to the teacher and get it over and done with. Maybe you have had some exams before in the same day. So yes, we understand that you're tired, but please don't do it. Don't just finish writing and give it to the examiners. Please don't. Stop for a minute. Read it again. Read the whole exam. In terms of writing, please try and read it and paying special attention to scary mistakes. If you click here, or if you scan the code, you will find this list that I always gave to my students with the kinds of mistakes, typically grammatical mistakes, that you can't be making in year 2 bachillerato. Typical mistake, which is terrible, say things such as people is. No. People are, people have, people believe. Because people is a plural word in English. Okay, so these kinds of mistakes. So be careful with mistakes, but also reread your text and make sure that your text is clear visually. I mean that your paragraphs are clearly divided, that it's very clear to see, not for you, but for somebody who reads the text, that visually it's very clear to see the 3 or 4 paragraphs, that the content can be understood by the person or people reading it. And imagine somebody else is going to read it. You know what you meant. So make sure that anybody could understand it. Try to avoid Spanish translation. I'm sure your teachers must have told you a million times already. If you're translating literally from Spanish into English, probably your sentence will be very difficult to understand. So try to avoid that. Try to write in English. Try to think in English. That is why it's so important to have a draft and to think before you actually write it. And my final tip, I'm just going to give you some ideas on how to practice a bit further for this particular exam. If you want to write properly in English, if you want to have the language and the ideas, a very good idea for you would be to read or listen to or watch things related, for example, to the news. And I'm going to suggest 3 possible resources. If you visit this link, which is where you have all the resources, I'm also going to include some possible writing tasks if you want to practice at home. So imagine they were the tasks you might be given at the exam. In here, you will also find a sample writing task, a piece of writing that a student in your year might have written, and it would be a good piece of writing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to analyze why it is a very good piece of writing, the structure, the linking words, the content, the vocabulary. So if you're interested, you can click here and you will find that, which hopefully will give you more ideas on how to write a good essay. So that's all from me. I hope you found the video useful and I wish you very good luck with your exam.